Hi, Sangeeta Sharma here. We are back with the second episode of the limited video series of literary and critical conversations. Wish you all a warm and happy spring morning from Toronto, Canada, and good evening to all my Indian friends. Today we have got with us a distinguished guest from Washington, D.C., USA. The sophisticated and scholarly Dr. Anita Nahal, an American professor, poet, short story writer, flash fictionist, and a lot more. On behalf of Setu, I extend a hearty welcome to her. Setu, the peer-reviewed monthly bilingual journal of arts from Pittsburgh, USA, has taken this initiative to provide a platform to showcase the oeuvre of the accomplished literary authors, poets, artists, et al. Under this prestigious banner. I take this opportunity to introduce the multi-talented Dr. Anita Nahal, who she says has been lovingly called a Renaissance woman, a phoenix, a humanist, and a relentless worker by her admirers. Anita Nahal, PhD, CDP, is a Pushcart Prize-nominated Indian-American author and academic. She has 4 books of poetry, 1 of flash fiction, 4 for children, and 5 edited anthologies to her credit. Her 3rd book of poetry, What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women, was nominated by Cyril Debedine, Guyanese Indian-Canadian, Ottawa Poet Laureate Emeritus, and novelist as the best poetry book in 2021 for Ars Notoria. It's also a mandatory reading in an elective course on multicultural society at Utrecht University, the Netherlands. Her latest release is a collection of ekphrastic prose poetry, Kisses at the Espresso Bar. Anita's poems have appeared in numerous journals in the US, UK, Asia, and Australia, and have been anthologized in many collections, including the Polaris Trilogy, which will be sent to the moon in the SpaceX launch. Her first novel, Drenched Thoughts, is set to be released in 2023. In addition to her master's degree and MPhil from Delhi University and a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, she is a Fulbright postdoctoral scholar in residence from Binghamton University, New York. Currently, Anita teaches at the University of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Anita is the daughter of Sahitya Academy Award-winning novelist and professor late Dr. Chaman Nahal and educationist late Dr. Sudarshana Nahal. Her family includes her son, daughter-in-law, and golden doodle girl. That's her pet, Cashew. And now, to set the tempo of this tete-a-tete, I read one of her extracts from her 3rd poetry book, What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women? The poem is titled, There's a Hole in My Heart, but My Heart is Whole. Quote, My head is lowered in prayer. I am not defeated, not depressed, nor barren. There is a hole in my heart, but my heart is not a hole. It's always whole like warm, fresh rotis, just off the tawa, like a spoonful of pure ghee in hot lentil curry, unquote. Friends, without waiting anymore, let's listen to her vibrant voice pulsating with zest and ardor. I welcome Anita Nahal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, for this absolutely fabulous introduction. I really appreciate that, and I am thankful to you, Setu team, Sunil ji, Anurag Sharma for inviting me and being part of this platform. I'm delighted to be here today.
Yeah, so let's start with the conversation. Well, we know that you are from a family of educationists, with your father being a very creative and ingenuous person and a prolific writer. Would you please share something about your early life in Delhi in a famous literary household?
Wow. Well, growing up in an educationist environment, it tends to build foundations that at that time, as children, we don't realize. But as you grow older, you think back and you understand and appreciate those foundational pillars that were established at that time. So, of course, reading and reading a lot of books. My parents used to have us pick out new words from a dictionary every day. We had to find a new poem and learn and recite it every week. So there was a constant focus on reading and learning. And watching my father write, he as I was growing up, he was writing and publishing. So maybe partly because of that, partly because of seeing my mother, who was principal of a school, also a writer in her own right. She wrote one of the leading books on principles and leadership styles. So both of my parents, they amalgamated in my mind, I think, the desire to write and express. Many people find expression in us different. My right artistic genre, for example, writing or painting or dancing. So for me, it was writing, and I started very early, around 9 years of age. And many folks say that we, when you
So
look back, we
early.
started very early. And they used to encourage me. I used to write, very simple poems. And it just built up on that. And yeah, and I look back, there's so many other things that one learns from this kind of environment. For example, discipline, focus on what you're trying to do, plus construction, of your thoughts and thoughts into words, plus the whole process of writing and rewriting and revising, and using, for example, a dictionary and thesaurus. So all of that came from that environment.
Okay, because those days there was no Google and no digital technology. So yeah,
Correct.
that's great. Thank you so much for sharing these inspiring personal nuggets from your highly progressive, creative family. Having inherited the gene pool from your accomplished parents, when did you start your literary journey? You said it was when you were 9, but how was your experience at that young age?
Right. So I have been deeply influenced from my childhood by injustices around me. So most of my writings, even now, they focus on something that is unfair or something that is not just and equal. I'm looking for the egalitarianism in most things in life.
Oh.
So my poems at that time were mostly about life, about the philosophy of life. And I would find life in inanimate objects. I would use inanimate objects or nature to describe my understanding or my questioning about life. So that those were the early poems, and I kept building on that. And my first book came out in 1988, my first poetry book. It was called Initiations. A lot of philosophy seeped in those poems. And then when my son was born, I started to think a little differently. And I thought, why not write children's books? So very early on, he was hardly 3 or 4 years of age. And I thought, why only read to him, well-known nursery rhymes like Humpty Dumpty or, Jack and Jill. So I started writing rhymes which got published between 1990 and 1993. There were 2 books of children's rhymes and a book of children's stories. So my writing journey began at 9. I continued to write throughout. I was writing in the school, newspaper or magazine. And then when I grew up further, especially after completing my studies, because you're so focused on your bachelor's and master's, that I really started focusing after I completed my formal studies. I started writing and then constantly sending them out for publication. And as you said, that was not a digital age. So we couldn't send through computer, couldn't send via email. So visiting, Hindustan Times or the Pioneer office and trying to get my work in and published. So yeah, it was a long process, but a very fulfilling process. Very fulfilling. Because once you write, you've expressed it, and then you want to share it. And if by chance it gets published, one is, so grateful for that.
So that's great. It's a remarkable journey. I again quote an excerpt from What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women. What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women has created a lot of buzz in literary circles and social media. So here I am with one of the excerpts. Quote, "There's nothing wrong. That's your fear labeling us. We are the Kali women and all other female, male, androgynous gods. Always in front, straddling between pathways, poles, blocks, and behavior. Between screams and footsteps, pinning for justice denied, justice battered, justice flagged, murdered, burned, and then some in their sinister voice sing well into the murking night, Ma Kali, Ma Kali, Ma Kali, Ma Kali. Don't think she's not watching." Unquote. Here's your next. Now, Anita, what are your views of Indian writing in English, prose, and poetry? And having spent so many years in the US and getting published, please comment about the literary scene there.
Yes, sure. So it's a wonderful question and very wide. So I'm just going to try to present as succinctly as possible I can. I personally believe that there are so many people writing these days, so many people expressing, that it's a very positive sign. It's extremely hopeful. And especially younger writers all over the world, in India and the United States, particularly since we are talking about those 2 geographical locations, people are writing and sharing. Facebook, social media has become such a potent and viable means of sharing and then getting feedback and also publishing. Amazon is there for self-publishing. There are so many publishing houses in India that are encouraging poetry and prose writings. We have Authors Press, and I'm talking about publishers that have risen and independent publishers. So you have Authors Press, or Hawakal or Red River. There are so many literary journals in India that too are promoting literary writings. The very and Indian literary scene, the very fact that Gitanjali Shree's novel Tomb of the Sand received the Booker International Prize in Translation, that is absolutely an exemplary presentation of an award to someone who has written in a different language, but then it was translated into English. So I really commend the Indian literary scene, and there has been a study I was recently seeing that during COVID, had impacted the world in so many negative ways, but there were also these nuggets of positive things that were emerging. And one of them was getting online and, organizing events or sharing about your publication. So Nielsen did a book, Nielsen Book India did a consumer research on the impact of COVID on learning and writing in India. And they did this research on about 1,000, that's what they say, 1,084 adults between the 60% women and 40% men. That was the demographic breakup. And according to this research, listening to audiobooks increased by 7 hours per week during COVID time. 2 out of 5 people were spending more time reading print books. Then there was also an improvement noticed in other forms like ebooks. Older women were reading more during COVID time as well. There was also an increased interest in children's picture books during COVID. And more people were buying online also during COVID, because obviously you're not going out or to the marketplace to buy. So while there was a decline in the actual sales of bookshops, but the interest in being involved in reading and writing increased highly during the COVID time. So I would say the literary scene is flourishing. It's very vibrant in India. There are so many younger writers. Just to name a few: Vasudhara Roy, Sutanuka Ghosh Roy, Abha Das Sarma, Jyoti Nair, you yourself. Then in India, Meghas, in the United States, Megha Sood, then Alka Tyagi in India as well. So many older writers. I'm doing a session on older women writers for the DC South Asian Arts Council coming up in May. So there are so many older Indian women, especially women writers, and I'm focusing on women. Sorry, I'm leaving the men out. But there's so many, since that session is on women writers: Sanyukta Das Gupta, Mala Srilal, Lakshmi Kanan, Swati Paul, Seema Jain, Sukrita Paul Kumar, Vanita Agarwal, Kavita Ezekiel Mendoka. So there are so many Indian writers part of in India and in the diaspora who are ensuring that they're keeping poetry and prose alive. We recently sadly lost Sujata Mathai, who was a very well-known Indian poet and novelist. So I would say it's vibrant, and I would say that it's very it's touching on themes of concern, of global concern. So environment, or abuse in different myriad forms around the world. I see all those themes being covered in poetry in the United States, abroad, other parts of the world, and India. So I'm very hopeful, because ultimately, as you'll agree, writing allows us to hopefully impact, change, to bring about positive change in life.
Yeah, to disseminate the right ideas, writing is the best tool. And then getting the right publishers is crucial for the writer, that can make or mar his or her love of labor.
That is true.
Totally, depends on the stars.
Yeah, it is. Sorry?
Stars. If you get the right publisher.
Yes.
It totally depends on your stars.
Yes, destiny is a huge part. Luck and destiny plays a huge part in anyone's success. And there are a lot of authors these days that are self-publishing. There are a lot of publishers that are, who have literally focused on encouraging new writers. Setu, organization is literally an organization. It has encouraged so many different writers. Confluence, for example, in England, Samyukta Journal in India. So there are so many publishing outlets for authors these days. A lot of publishing going on, but only a few achieve success. And I think, of course, as you said, the destiny and luck plays a huge part. I believe that our role as a writer is to put it out, share it with the world. If it gets an award or achieves success, great. If it doesn't, we have still fulfilled our purpose. That is, that you feel strongly about something, you express it, and then you share it with the others.
At least you are leaving your footprints.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, what are the themes in your poetry? What do you write about? And will you tell us something about the styles and literary sources you employ?
Sure. So themes. My overall arching theme is always has been injustice. And anything related with injustice around the world, I try to portray in my poems. So whether it is racism or ageism, class differences, classism, or at a personal level, domestic violence or widowhood, or the way women are treated around the world, also unemployment, even human emotions such as conceit, ego, narcissism. So anything that I find that brings about inequality among people, I try to portray in my themes. Also, I write a lot about immigrants. I do a lot of immigrant writing and diaspora writing. As far as the styles I write in, when I started writing when I was a child, I generally wrote in free verse. And then as I grew older and I think my writing style just tended to shift because I had so much to say. I started writing long poems.
Yeah.
Then I started writing prose poetry.
We love them.
Yeah. Thank you. And so currently my poetry is mostly prose poetry, which is almost like spoken word, but I don't memorize it and perform on the stage, but it's written in paragraph form and not in stanzas. And most of my poetry tends to be a kind of a mix, an amalgam of realism and surrealism. Also, my poetry is confessional and observational, and like most writers are. And in terms of the literary sources I employ, the one that I employ a lot is repetition. I think it's called tautology, where I repeat certain words again and again just to draw focus, attention, or stress on those, on a particular concept or emotion. Also, I employ imagery, paradox, metaphor, satire, personification.
All kinds of figures.
All kinds of things. Socratic questioning. Since my training is as a historian, I tend to bring in historical sources. And of course, I also employ epics and a lot of popular culture in my poetry. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. The young audience, I'm sure, will benefit immensely from your tips. Before I move over to the next, I read out from your fourth poetry book, Kisses at the Espresso Bar. The poem is I Interpret My Colorless Drink. Quote, pour yourself some scotch, pour yourself some water, pour yourself some erudition from the tree of souls, and I will listen. Pour yourself some ire, some envy, some conceit, and I will stare at you enough to freeze you down. Unquote. So that's a powerful excerpt. Well, we move on to the next. Please tell us about your recent poetry book, Kisses at the Espresso Bar. I believe
Yes.
it's an entirely ekphrastic poetry book.
Right, right. So this is the book. I requested 7 artists from different parts of the world. Those
Mhm.
who were painters, or they sketched, or they created sculpture, or they made quilt work. They did quilt work.
Oh.
So I had seen their work, either I'd known them already or I came to know on social media, and I really admired their art. So, and it invoked in me something enough to write poetry. And that's what acrophistic poetry is, poetry based on visuals. But it doesn't mean that the poetry is an exact um, it's exactly symbolic of the artwork,
Mhm.
but it's more what feelings I felt after seeing that artwork. And I want to give a shout out to all the artists from around the world whose artwork is included. It's Canadian Loretta Lujac. She's a mixed media artist. Then from Australia, Elizabeth Lish Skeck, and she's a sculpturist as well as a poet. Then Madan Tashi, who does a lot of mural work. He lives in the hills of Missouri, introduced to me by Anu Kumar, who is a yoga practitioner, and she lives there. Then from Mumbai, Madhumita Sinha, who is a poet and an artist. Then from North Carolina, Michael D. Harris, who sadly we lost last year, but he was a writer and a professor and an artist, also a mixed media artist. And Manju Narayan, she's actually a childhood friend of mine who currently lives in Chicago, but she does amazing quilt work. And then Anthony Gartman from New Jersey, who does all his drawings with graphite pencil. So that's what this book is about. And I do want to give a shout out to Kelsey Publishers, my publishers, who made sure that each of the images came out in color in the book. So while this is the sculpture by Elizabeth Skeck, so instead of producing the images in black and white, the color impact is really tremendous.
Mhm. I
That's
join you in the shout out to Kelsey Publishers and to the 7 artists. They have done a real wonderful job.
absolutely.
With an expert from the poem Kisses at the Espresso Bar,
Mhm.
we can move on to another question. I quote, the sips and the dips and the lips and the hips are ready as she hurries out, blowing kisses at the froths in the cups and the cakes and the sugars and the creams. Unquote. That's quite rhythmic.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes within a particular poem, while I don't write rhyming poetry, but within a particular poem, I'll insert certain lines of which are rhyming, just to get that emphasis going.
Reading them, I once felt that I'm reading Shobha Day's works.
Ah, okay, got it. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
How has been the general and critical reception of your books?
Well, poet always or a writer always wishes for great reception. And because once you share your writing, once it's out of your hands, it's gone. It's in the public sphere, public space. So I have been, lucky, and I'm blessed, and I'm grateful that I have received very good responses, both in India and in abroad. And I think, especially with the "What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women" book, because the title, while it's invoking the goddess Kali, but there's so many themes in the book that are about universal injustices. So I think people related to the poems, and even in the other books. So it's always really wonderful to hear, to get an email, or to get a response, or someone tells you personally. So that was at the general level, and critically, I think I received some absolutely fabulous book reviews, both in India and the United States, in newspapers like The Statesman, The Pioneer, in Confluence, in Setu. So yeah, it's been a very satisfying and fulfilling journey to receive that kind of feedback. And last year, actually, one of my poems was nominated for the Pushcart Award. So I felt very validated that, okay, there was some recognition, so I felt very grateful.
I wish you all the luck for your upcoming novel, for your other books. I quote from What's Wrong with Us Kali Women Now, from the poem Tequila and Spice Memories. The storms inside at times are hushed, at times vocal, at times fictional, at times like a memoir urging me to tell all as one would after a couple of tequila shots. So that again, Shobha Day's style.
I never thought of that because I haven't read
Well,
Shobha Day for years.
I can equate it with that. Yeah,
Okay.
it's so good.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I loved your style. Um, so the next is, which Indian poets and writers have influenced you strongly? Why?
Okay, great. I mentioned some before. Earlier I had made a mention of some younger writers and some older writers who are currently living in India. But I'm going to give you names even from the United States, not just India. And I think, first of all, I would like to say is, when it's basically life that influences me. So more than specific readers, life has influenced me. Plus, when I look at readers for inspiration, I seek not only literary writers, but also historical, because my discipline is history. So writers, of course, poets like Emily Dickinson, like Maya Angelou, Phyllis Whitley, who was the first African-American woman writer during the revolutionary times, and people like Langston Hughes and Toni Morrison. And then, as far as Indian writers are concerned, Chitra Banerjee, Deva Kurni, Vikram Seth. Also, of course, I've already mentioned those, so I won't be repeating them. But of course, Nazim Ezekiel, I liked his writings very much. Cyril Dibadine, I don't think I mentioned him before. Keki Daruwala, some of the writers that are currently there in India. And then writers like W.B. Du Bois, writers like Candace Bushnell, Anne Frank. So I have an amalgam of writers who influence me, but they may not necessarily be novelists and poets, because you get a little nugget from each one of them. Some learning comes from each one of them. And I'm also, I love reading autobiographies. So autobiographies in the recent times, President Obama's autobiography, and then his wife Michelle Obama's autobiography, Becoming. I really like that. Then there are some Indian writers in the United States that are writing wonderful fiction. I recently read a novel by Priya Malhotra. So all of these different writers combine together and mix in my mind and heart to influence me and guide me, because there's such a learning from each of their writing styles. In fact, Vikram Seth's The Golden Boy, he used the Onigan stanza in his novel. The whole novel is in Onigan stanza, which he borrowed from Pushkin. And there are 14 lines to that stanza. And my first novel that is going to be released this year has portions in poetry, which I was inspired from Vikram Seth's style.
Yeah, there's a lot of experimentation
A
going
lot of
on,
experience. Yes, a lot of
especially after 1920s, that modern age poetry started. So
precisely.
with that has come experimentation and innovative styles.
Precisely. And particularly when you mentioned the 1920s very rightly, because the 19s and 20s and 30s, because of what was happening in the world, the end of First World War. You have this huge
Yeah.
period of roaring 20s, especially in the United States. And then you have the Second World War. You had already had the Bolshevik
Depression era.
Revolution, right, in Russia. In India, the whole movement for independence was going on. And then in Africa and different countries struggling for independence. All that contributed to the rise, as you rightly mentioned, of writers and art. In fact, that is the time when surrealism also, really picks up in the 1930s. Yeah.
Yeah. With Ezra Pound at the helm,
Yes,
she
correct,
had
correct.
a cohort of writers who became very famous later.
Right. And Harlem Renaissance is also the period of the Harlem
Yes.
Renaissance movement. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Langston Hughes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So let's be quick then. I believe your first novel, Drenched Thoughts, is due out soon. What would you like to share about that?
So, the first novel is always a little tough, like any first book, first poetry book, first short story book. And my father was a novelist. We used to have this tete-a-tete when we were growing up. He used to say, "Why don't you write a novel? You should write a novel." And I would tell him, "I don't think I have the capacity to write a novel like you do." And he would tell me, I can't write poetry like you, but I try." Yes. So it took me a long time, many years, many revisions, many revisions. I think 16, 17 revisions to get this novel out. And it's really a story about a woman who leaves India, goes abroad, and then it's about her life. And the story is a combination of poetry and prose. So you'll have a
Okay.
couple of pages in poetry, then couple of pages in
Oh, I
prose.
see.
Yeah, so I hope the flow, people like the flow. It's not very long. I
Mhm,
don't know if I can write long novels, but about 200 pages. And I have received some very good feedback from my meta readers.
mhm,
Had meta readers around the world who went through it and gave me their critical feedback. And I have some very good blurbs by Deepa Agarwal, who is a
mhm,
novelist and children's writer and a poet, and by Dr. Dielson, and by Cyril Debedin, by Basudra Roy. So I have some very good blurbs, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And I will request everyone, and going to be published in India in an Indian edition first by Authors Press. So shout out to Sudarshan Kacheri and Authors Press. And I will keep my fingers crossed that folks buy it and then give me the feedback.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for giving us a peek into it. And we wish you all the luck
Thank you. Thank you so much.
for good publicity of the novel and good sale.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
now present an extract from one of your lovely poems, Sun. Quote, I am a little girl shepherd with just one loyal goat in my herd. The journey is solitary and long. I will cover it soon, humming the freedom song. Unquote. It's quite a touching um line.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I liked it
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. My son is a blessing to me, and yeah, he seeps into different poetry poems of mine. So I am grateful.
Okay, does he also read those?
Yes, he reads my work and he writes also. When we left India in 2002, he was already writing. And in fact, if he really starts writing, he's going to outdo me immensely. And I think the gene pool from my father has gone to him more directly than to me. And he was the editor of the student section of the Hindu Sun Times before he left India. He was only 13 and he was writing poetry and all travel articles. So yeah, and he's my best critique. My parents were my critique. They have passed. My son is carrying that, and so I always run by ideas with him and get his suggestions. So yeah,
So you have got a good companion in him. And
yes,
it's quite a solace to see that kids also have inherited the work, the kind of work you have been doing.
true,
Yeah.
very true, very true.
Um, So here's the next. Any important landmarks of your rich and variegated journey?
I think any important landmarks. I think, like, many writers, I keep that sentence phrase, coming of age. And we were talking about 1920s and 30s. The 1960s was another coming of age for so many writers. So, like that, for me, coming of age has been the points, beginning with 1988, when my book was published. Then 30 years later, 2018, my second poetry book was published. So I think those 30 years that life took over, I think they imbibed within me so many emotions and so many experiences I went through. That itself is a long journey, I would call, as part of my writing or maturing as a human being. One has to mature as a human being, learn from one's mistakes, self-reflect a lot. If we don't do that, we really don't grow as people.
Mhm.
So all that has contributed to my, what was the word you used, variegated journey as a writer. And so I would look upon those as landmarks. The 1988, 2018. Then after that, very quickly, some of these books came out, as if my inner voice was just waiting to get everything out before I forget. And
Mhm.
also in the last couple of years, I have brought out a number of edited anthologies with other writers, and that's been very satisfying to encourage younger writers. I strongly believe in succession planning. I don't believe anyone is indispensable. We're all going to go, and it's what we leave behind that's very important, or people we have mentored. So that is very important for me. I've just started I'm going to start. I shouldn't say I've just started. It was always my wish to have a gathering in my home of poets and writers who just come and read, non-competitive, very informal, and I'm calling it Batak. So we are hoping to start it. I'm hoping to start it in July in this area, in the Washington, D.C. area. So
Mhm.
all those are journeys. Writing the novel is a journey. I've started a new novel. That's a great element, with me. I hope I want it to be a funny novel. People
Mhm.
say I write very serious poetry. I write very serious things. I don't write light-hearted stuff, except for my children's books. So I'm hoping my second novel will be amusing and people will find it funny and want to read it. So, Sangeeta, I don't know if that answered your question, but all of those have contributed, to my journey as a human and a woman, and as a single mother. Having when my son was born, that was a very important moment in my life. So
Mhm.
all those things combined together.
Yeah, it's quite a roller coaster ride for you all these years.
Yes.
Yeah, you have
It's
ridden on the waves of the ocean called life. And
yes.
I can well say that your admirers who call you a phoenix, they are right in saying that,
Thank you.
because the multidimensionality and the versatility that you exhibit now in your works and in your persona, you can well be called a relentless worker, a phoenix, and a renaissance woman. I have also read somewhere that you are a good dancer too.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. That's quite true. I forgot that part. Dance is very important. Thank you for bringing that up. Dance is very important for my just letting go and enjoying. And I've learned all kinds of dance. I have learned Bharatnatyam, a little bit of Kathak, many folk dances, ballet. I've done formal training in ballet as well. And then hip hop and salsa, and I still go dancing. I still put on music almost every other day and dance for 35, 40 minutes as form of exercise. And yes, because and I believe life itself is a dance. you know
That's true.
yeah, sometimes you're walking on tiptoes, like ballet dancers, skirting around things, skirting around issues and problems, and trying to pirouette around and
Mhm.
find our way out, or suggest something new, some new steps. So life is a dance, as long as one is positive, and as long as one's family, children and family are, doing well in life. I always say
Yeah, it's
that
not
that's
just
it.
mm,
Yeah.
not just an exercise, it's a great stress buster too.
Great stress buster.
Yeah, and you feel like you are your own self
Yes, yes,
while in that
absolutely. On the
act
dance
of
floor, actually, I
dancing.
told, say that again.
While in that act of dancing,
Yes,
mm,
yes. On the dance floor, sometimes, I mean, I feel I'm just in a different world.
mm,
If there's good music playing, I will just dance and yeah. Yeah,
it's
I do.
awesome to hear about your fascinating literary journey as well as your multidimensional interests. The last question now, what is your message to the young and the established writers?
Right. First thing I would say is that if you have thoughts in your mind, think, develop those thoughts. Don't feel hesitant to, uh, meander in your thoughts and find your way. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'll say that if you are really, you feel strongly about your thoughts or anything, write, and then rewrite and rewrite. Correct. Sangeeta, even after my poems are published in my books or in journals, you'll find another version after 2 years, which is slightly different. I'm constantly revising. I feel, oh, I could have cut that word. I could have cut that word. So revising is very, very necessary. And you'd use the dictionary and thesaurus, as your great friends in writing. And then the third thing is publish. Do not hesitate, regardless of any rejections you get. This was a message that came from my father. Like any writers, we all get rejections. And
Mhm.
he would too. And then my mom would hide the letters, when the rejection would come. In those days, it came in letters. And then he would say, no, 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 show me, don't worry. I need to see the rejections. So I also get lots of rejections, but
Mhm.
so I tell young writers, don't hesitate, don't worry about the rejections. They are going to actually help you grow. They will make you, see what's in your rejection. In fact, I wish I had lots of teachers telling me what
Mhm.
was not in my writing early on. My father was there, but very few other writers outside. If
Mhm.
I had more mentors, maybe I would have matured as a writer much earlier. I'm a late bloomer, to be honest, in writing. So that's what I would say. Think, you know, think about your thoughts. Of course, read, think, then write, rewrite, and publish, publish, publish. And one day you will get somewhere. And always remember that it's important we run after our dreams. And dream big. If you dream small, you'll get small results. So dream big, so there's
Mhm.
something you get. And if your dreams are not fulfilled, don't worry. Think of new dreams. There's always a new journey, right? There's always another day.
Quite a message. Youngsters will surely learn a lot from it, and we too have really found a lot to be, imbibed from all that you said. It was pleasure talking to you, lovely lady. We could
Thank
cover a wide spectrum of areas in this short span. Thanks, Anita. Thanks, viewers. In the next episode, we will be having another important guest with us. Till then, bye bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Setu, Sunilji. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
It was pleasure. Bye.
Bye.